The scream tore through the night like a jagged blade, sharp enough to slice through the static hum of the city. "Stop, he's already dead," she shouted, voice trembling, ragged with fear and disbelief. Her hands shook so violently that she could barely hold her phone to her ear, the pale glow illuminating streaks of sweat and tears on her face. The rain had started again, soft at first, then heavy, smacking against the asphalt in relentless rhythmic bursts, turning the street into a slick mirror reflecting flickering police lights. Every step she took felt like walking through a nightmare, each puddle a shallow pool of reflection that distorted the horror before her. The officer arrived moments later, boots splashing through water, his jacket soaked, face tense but controlled. She could see the lines of exhaustion etched into his jaw, the way his hands hovered uncertainly, not yet touching the lifeless body that lay crumpled on the cold concrete. Around them, the city seemed to hold its breath. The honk of a distant car, the whine of a siren, even the heavy wet scent of asphalt and rain carried the weight of the moment. Her chest heaved. She couldn't tell if it was grief, fear, or disbelief. And then he did something she would never forget. A methodical, precise movement, almost a dance in the chaos, something no one expected. Time slowed. The world shrank to that single heartbeat, and hope, impossibly, threaded itself through the terror like a fragile silver line. The night had a weight to it, like the sky itself was pressing down on the narrow street. Rain-slicked asphalt gleamed under the harsh yellow of the streetlights, puddles reflecting fractured shadows of a city that seemed to have stopped breathing. She crouched near him, hands shaking so violently they could barely hold onto the fraying fabric of his jacket. Each breath she drew was jagged, wet, like inhaling shards of glass. Her scream had already ripped through the alley moments ago, but the echo still clung to the walls, bouncing back at her in distorted, cruel loops. "Stop, he's already dead." The words burned in her throat as if repeating them might summon some answer from the uncaring dark. Around her, the city carried on an ignorant rhythm. A car honked 2 blocks away. A siren wailed somewhere distant, and the soft splash of raindrops against metal and concrete formed a grim, relentless percussion. She didn't know how long she had been frozen there, staring at his motionless form, watching the life she knew slip away like water through clenched fingers. Her chest heaved uncontrollably, the weight of helplessness pressing against it with each heartbeat. A puddle at her feet reflected her own face. Eyes wide and unseeing, wet strands of hair plastered to her cheeks, lips quivering. She could smell the sharp tang of rain-mixed blood, a metallic scent that clawed its way into her throat and made her gag. Her fingers trembled as they brushed against his cold skin, searching, wishing, pleading for a warmth that wasn't there. Time had fractured itself into jagged pieces, each second stretching impossibly long, every heartbeat louder than the last. The world around her had become a cruelly detailed diorama of tragedy. The neon glow of a shuttered storefront flickered like a heartbeat, a broken lamppost dripped water slowly, rhythmically, and the distant rumble of thunder shook the ground beneath her. She heard the boots before she saw them. Splashing through puddles, a figure approached with a careful, deliberate gait, the dark fabric of his raincoat plastered to his body, water dripping from the brim of his hat. The officer arrived with a weightless authority, a presence that somehow carved space through the chaos. She wanted to scream again, to run, to collapse into his arms, but the horror of the moment rooted her in place. His eyes swept the scene methodically, scanning, calculating, and yet there was something ineffably human in the way his hands hesitated above her fallen friend, not yet touching, as if he too were holding. It was the first interaction that felt like a thread pulling her back from the edge. Her hands, still trembling, lifted instinctively to mirror his, brushing against his arm as if by proximity she could lend some. This was what made his job more than procedure. This was what made it human. His hands hovered over the figure on the ground, gloved fingers slightly shaking, a testament to the stakes at hand. The technique he had learned, repeated in drills countless times, seemed almost ceremonial now, each step a sacred ritual, executed in perfect precision. Yet beneath the trained muscle memory, there was a thread of doubt. What if this time, like too many before, the outcome was inevitable? He pushed the thought aside, forcing his mind into the narrow tunnel of focus required to navigate life and death. Around him, the rain intensified, hammering the city into a blur of wet steel and blurred lights. Water dripped into the folds of his jacket, ran down his sleeves, and pooled at the cuffs, but he felt only the rhythm of breath and movement, the fragile pulse of possibility beneath his fingers. He noticed the smallest details, the way her eyes flickered toward him, darting between panic and hope, seeking some reassurance that life was not slipping away entirely. The way her knees dug into the puddled street, teeth clenched, palms red and raw from gripping the edges of her coat. The way her chest rose and fell with frantic unevenness, a human storm that mirrored the tempest around them. He realized that his role was not only to attempt the impossible, to coax life back into a collapsing body, but to anchor her, to be the fixed point in a swirling world. That responsibility weighed on him more than the rain, more than the cold, more than any physical exhaustion. Memories flickered behind his eyes unbidden. A boy he couldn't save in a parking garage. A woman lost to seconds he hadn't accounted for. The oppressive grief of parents whose eyes still haunted him in the quiet hours of the night. He had carried those ghosts silently, refusing to let them infect the moments that demanded clarity. And yet tonight he could feel their whisper, the gentle, insistent pull reminding him that every choice mattered, that every hesitation could tip the balance irreversibly. He swallowed the rising anxiety, focusing instead on the tactile immediacy of the scene, the pulse beneath his gloved fingers, the subtle rise and fall of a rib cage that was not quite gone, the minuscule twitch in his shoulder that could signal the fragile return of life. Time became a molten, elastic thing, seconds stretched into eternities. The officer's movements were precise and deliberate, hands cupping, pressing, adjusting, always attuned to the faintest signs of response. Each action was informed not only by training, but by the deep intuition that only years of immersion in life and death could cultivate. The storm around them created an almost cinematic backdrop. Rain sheets whipped sideways, thunder rattled the street signs, neon lights refracted in puddles into kaleidoscopic fragments of color. The sensory overload could have paralyzed anyone else, but he filtered it into a quiet tunnel of focus. Every drop of rain, every distant honk, every echo off the alley walls sharpened his awareness, reinforcing the singular truth. The world had narrowed to this exact spot, to this exact body, and he was the one who had to thread possibility through the needle of impossibility. She whispered something incomprehensible, a fragment of fear and pleading that the storm carried away almost immediately. He nodded once, barely perceptible, understanding more than the words conveyed. She needed presence, constancy, a human tethered to the ground. He became that tether, his voice steady as he guided her through deep, controlled breaths, mirroring the rhythm he wished to coax into the other body. The officer's mind moved like clockwork, cataloging every detail. The shallow rise and fall of a chest, the tremor of fingers, the subtle moisture of lips, the faint flutter of an eyelid. All of it was data, but all of it was deeply human. In those details he found possibility. He thought about his own hands, scarred and calloused from years of work and life, and how those same hands had failed before. But not tonight. Not if he could help it. The memories of past failures pressed like a weight. But he transformed the pressure into focus. Every technique he had learned, every repetition in the gym, every sleepless night reviewing procedures culminated in these precise moments. He did not act recklessly, but with a deliberation that bordered on ritual. Around him, the rain pounded harder now, drumming a chaotic accompaniment to the fragile symphony he conducted. Every droplet hitting concrete seemed to echo the possibility of life, each splash a reminder that the world was vast and different, but still alive. He felt a small stir beneath his touch, a twitch almost imperceptible but undeniably there. His eyes narrowed, heart quickening, but his voice remained calm. "I see you. Keep fighting," he murmured, a low hum that cut through the storm's roar. The woman's hands reached tentatively toward him, seeking contact, seeking connection, and he allowed it, guiding her into the rhythm of possibility. He realized that life was not coaxed alone. It was threaded through the connections between people, the quiet insistence of presence, the shared heartbeat in the chaos. Every muscle, every neuron, every second of awareness was tuned to the same fragile goal, to thread that thin, impossible line between life and death. And in that moment, he understood why he had chosen this path, why he had endured every sleepless night, every haunting memory, every burden carried silently. It was for these moments of human fragility and resilience, for the chance to transform despair into possibility. He could not control the world, nor erase tragedy, but he could stand as a bridge, a small but critical conduit through which hope could flow. The rain began to thin slightly, though the storm still raged, a muted percussion rather than a battering drum. In that subtle shift, the officer found clarity. The human body was resilient, responsive to intent and presence. Every twitch, every shallow breath, every eye flicker was a message, a thread he had to follow, and he did with painstaking precision. Around them, the city seemed to breathe with them, its lights flickering softly, a silent witness to the delicate balance between devastation and survival. He felt her tension ease slightly, a reflection of his own commitment to the task. They were, in that moment, bound together by fear, hope, and the shared weight of witnessing life hang by a thread. He straightened slightly, adjusting his stance, feeling the subtle alignment of joints and pressure points as he prepared for the next phase, the next crucial step that might bring the body fully back into the realm of the living. Each motion was deliberate, every second laden with consequence. Around them, the rain-slicked street, the flickering neon, the distant hum of cars, the metallic scent in the air, all of it sharpened the scene into an almost sacred tableau of human resilience and quiet courage. He could feel the small pulse of life beneath his fingers, tentative, hesitant, but undeniable. And in that pulse, he found both challenge and promise, fear and purpose, doubt and possibility, intertwined in a single, irreducible moment. The world had narrowed to the point where only three bodies existed: hers, his, and the officer's, entangled in a fragile triangle of fear, hope, and unspoken desperation. Rain still fell in relentless sheets, drumming on the asphalt, bouncing off puddles, and sliding in rivulets along the edges of buildings, but it no longer dominated their awareness. The officer's hands moved with surgical precision, guided by both muscle memory and intuition, pressing, tilting, listening for signals that could barely be perceived. Every twitch of a finger, every faint rise of a ribcage was scrutinized, a whisper from the edge of life that demanded attention. Time stretched, compressing and elongating unpredictably. Each second became a universe in which fate hung in delicate balance. Her knees had dug into the wet concrete, palms raw from gripping her coat, body trembling so violently she thought she might collapse. Tears mingled with rain, streaking her face with trails of salt and cold water, and she could taste the metallic tang of fear in her mouth. The city had faded into a blur, the sirens and distant car horns melting into an indistinct hum, leaving only the intimate cacophony of life and death, the officer's measured breathing, the faint heartbeat that might have been imagination, and the frantic rhythm of her own heart, hammering in her chest like a war drum. Each breath she took was conscious, deliberate, an attempt to anchor herself in a reality that threatened to dissolve. The officer's face was set, expression taut with concentration, eyes narrowing in focus as he adjusted his hands, repositioned his body, and whispered calm encouragements to her. "Stay close," he said, voice low and even. "Watch, breathe. Help me hold him here." Those words were fragile bridges between panic and composure, and she clung to them as if they were lifelines. She mirrored his slow, deep inhalations, letting them guide her own chaotic rhythm, feeling a sliver of control return. Around them, rainwater pooled in small rivulets, reflecting the neon glow of a nearby store and flickering streetlights, turning the street into a broken mirror of the world outside, distorted yet vividly alive. Then came the first truly impossible moment, a small, almost imperceptible flutter of an eyelid. It was barely there, a hesitation in motion, a twitch that might have been imagination, but it sent a shock of adrenaline through her veins, an electric pulse of fragile hope. The officer noticed it immediately, a slight uptick in the precision of his movements, eyes softening just enough to acknowledge the possibility. He spoke again, voice lower now, almost reverent. "There it is. Focus on that. Keep it with you." Flutter became a thread, weaving possibility into the otherwise relentless reality of death. And she found herself leaning closer instinctively, hands hovering over his chest, ready to assist in whatever way she could, desperate to be part of the miraculous thread that tethered him to life. The technique he employed was unlike anything she had seen, a careful choreography that seemed both ritualistic and deeply intuitive. Hands pressing, tilting, listening, guiding. Every motion was deliberate, executed with the certainty of one who had trained for years, but also the humility of someone who knew life could refuse to obey even the most precise instructions. The officer's voice continued to anchor her, low and calm, a metronome against the storm outside. "Breathe with me," he instructed. And she did, her breath syncing with his, her heartbeat echoing in the same rhythm, her entire body coalescing into a single fragile instrument of possibility. Time slowed until it became something pliable, almost tangible. She felt the wet concrete beneath her knees, cold and unyielding, but irrelevant. The officer's hands, precise and warm through gloves, pressing and guiding, became the axis around which her world rotated. Streetlights reflected off puddles, casting distorted shadows that danced across the walls of the alley, but the motion felt secondary to the delicate miracle unfolding before her eyes. She realized with a shock that she had stopped thinking in ordinary terms. Seconds no longer passed. Moments no longer measured reality. Everything existed in this single, compressed plane of life hanging by a fragile thread. A shallow cough escaped him, barely audible beneath the rain's drum. Yet to her it was deafening. She gasped, heart leaping, fingers brushing instinctively over his chest, feeling warmth where she had expected cold. The officer's hands did not falter, guiding, coaxing, pressing with the precision of both science and deep empathy. She felt the fragile pulse grow stronger, tentatively, as if the body itself remembered how to fight, how to insist upon life despite the violent intrusion of fate. Each heartbeat, each breath, each subtle movement was a victory, and she allowed herself to hope, to breathe a little more evenly, to lean into the possibility that the impossible was happening. Round them, the storm began to shift subtly, the rain still falling but less insistently, a soft drizzle now, like the world itself was exhaling. The metallic scent of blood mingled with wet asphalt and ozone, a complex, almost unbearable perfume of survival and struggle. Her own hands were trembling, raw from effort and fear, yet she refused to pull them away. She realized she was no longer an observer. She was part of this fragile dance, tethered to the heartbeat that refused to surrender. Her eyes followed every motion of the officer, memorizing the precise choreography, feeling the gravity of the technique, the impossible precision of coaxing life back from the brink. He whispered again, words carried softly against the storm's diminished roar. "Oh, we're here. You're not alone. Fight with me." And she fought alongside him, not through skill but through presence, through witnessing, through the shared will that seemed to infuse the rain-slicked street with quiet electricity. Around them, reflections shimmered in puddles, distorted and fractured, but beautiful in the way that broken things often are. She noticed the subtle trembling of his hands beneath gloves, the taut muscles in his neck, the faint lines of concentration around his eyes. He was human, and yet in this crucible, he became something greater, a conduit through which life might pass, fragile but unbroken. Minutes passed that could have been hours, each second pregnant with possibility, each heartbeat a statement of defiance against the inevitability she had imagined. Then, faint but undeniable, came a deeper, stronger pulse. She felt it under her fingers, shared in the rhythm of her own heartbeat, a message from the body itself. "I am here. I am not gone." The officer's eyes met hers, and in that look was everything unspoken. Relief, awe, recognition of the fragility and resilience of life. Tears mingled with rain as she allowed herself to lean into the miracle, fingers pressing lightly, heart pounding. The world narrowed to the sacred rhythm of survival. The rain slowed further, a gentle mist now, washing over them with a soft patter that seemed to cleanse the horrors of the past minutes. The officer continued the technique, hands steady, guiding, coaxing, speaking softly, and she mirrored him as best she could, breath synchronized, presence unwavering. Every sense was heightened, the smell of wet concrete, the faint chemical tang of rain on metal, the subtle warmth returning to his skin, the sight of faint color creeping back into lips once pale as ash. She realized that the world outside the alley no longer existed. It was reduced to these bodies, these movements, this miraculous negotiation with. Finally, with a subtle cough, a deep inhalation, and a slight opening of eyes, life returned, not fully yet, not with certainty, but enough to shatter despair and thread hope into the night. She exhaled in relief so long and loud it felt as though she had been holding it since birth. The officer's hands remained gentle, patient, guiding every small motion, ensuring the fragile rhythm persisted, that the thread of life did not fray. Around them, the city seemed to exhale as well, neon reflections dancing on puddles, distant sirens fading into the mist, the storm diminished to a soft, cleansing drizzle. She leaned closer, overwhelmed with gratitude, shaking, rain and tears mingling on her cheeks, unable to speak but knowing that this moment, the impossible act, the return of life from death's edge, would be etched into her forever. And in the center of it all, the officer remained calm, steady, human and heroic, a quiet force threading life through the impossible, a witness and guide in a world that often refused either. In that suspended night, under dim streetlights and falling rain, she realized something profound. Survival is not merely a biological fact, but a fragile shared act, made possible by courage, presence, and the quiet insistence of someone refusing to let hope go. The rain had eased into a gentle mist, leaving the street wet and reflective, as if the night itself had been scrubbed clean by what had just occurred. The sharp scent of wet asphalt mingled with the faint metallic tang of blood, now diluted and fading, leaving a strange, almost sacred scent in the air. The officer helped him sit up slowly, every motion careful, deliberate, a study in patience and reverence. His fingers still gloved, hands steady, guided the trembling body upright, supporting him like a fragile sculpture that could collapse under its own weight. She knelt beside him, still trembling herself, hands hovering uncertainly, afraid to touch but desperate to connect. The world felt suspended, a fragile bubble containing pain, relief, and awe, all at once. She noticed how small he seemed now, despite being a grown man. The trauma of the moment had reduced him, stripped away confidence and posture, leaving only raw vulnerability. His chest rose and fell with uneven, trembling breaths, and she wanted to cradle him, to erase every second of terror, every heartbeat of panic, every moment that had felt like the end. But all she could do was be present, letting her warmth and attention surround him like a protective cocoon. The officer remained at his side, calm, his presence a steady force that tethered both of them to possibility. The subtle shift in posture, the minute increase in color returning to his face, the faint glimmer of awareness in his eyes, all of it felt miraculous, even in the subdued aftermath. Around them, the city had resumed a tentative rhythm. Car lights glinted on the wet pavement, and the distant hum of engines mixed with the soft whisper of wind through wet leaves. The officer's gaze softened, a silent affirmation that the impossible had been achieved, that life had been coaxed back from the edge, and that sometimes sheer presence and trained hands could thread hope through despair. Around them, the city had resumed a gentle rhythm. Distant traffic, muffled conversations, the occasional honk. The storm had left its mark, but it had also cleared space for recovery, reflection, and connection. Even the buildings, wet and gleaming, seemed to lean toward them, as if witnessing and honoring the fragile rebirth that had just taken place. The officer observed silently, letting them inhabit this moment of delicate transition, the space between despair and reclamation. Around them, puddles mirrored the awakening sky, clouds breaking into shards of rose and amber, a visual echo of the delicate beauty of survival. The city, so often indifferent, seemed to pause, allowing this moment to exist fully before resuming its usual cadence.